When you look at the world economic outlook, you are a lot more positive than you have been in the past. What changed in the last 6 months?
We upgraded our forecast for 2018 and 2019. And what's characteristic of that upgrade is that it's significant, 3.9 in both 2018 and 2019. Second, it covers a wide range of countries. It's not just the emerging market leading the charge. It's not just the advanced economies. It's pretty much across the board. But for some countries which are not seeing, on a per capita basis, income growing, and that is predominantly the sub-Saharan African countries. But whether you look at Japan, Germany, the US, Turkey, some of the big emerging market economies, we've upgraded pretty much across our range of countries. The one that did not get an upgrade is the UK. We left it where it was.
And we'll talk a little bit about the UK and Brexit, but President Trump is showing up here in Davos. I think this morning, the speech is tomorrow. If he has a very pro-America first agenda, if we see a bit more protectionist, does that hurt your forecast going forward?
You know, what we excuse me, what we see in the numbers at the moment is growth up, but trade even upper than growth. So trade is a very significant engine of growth, of reducing inequalities between countries, as we've seen over the last few decades. And clearly trade has to be fair, has to be in accordance with the rules, has to be reciprocated, and the tools need to be had by the trade players to make sure that this is the case. And I think that is the area where everybody will probably rally around some of the themes of President Trump, that it's not an issue of being protectionist, because protectionist measures generally do not help trade, do not help growth. But looking at the rules, resetting some of the rules eventually in view of what has happened in the last 10 years, whether it's through automation, whether it's through financing, all of that needs to be looked at on a regular basis.
Everyone looked at their history of dollar dynamics yesterday with the stunning headlines generated by the Secretary of Treasury back to John Connally in 1971. So here we are with a new weak dollar policy. Everything in the heritage of the International Monetary Fund is against that. State for us specifically and for our global audience why the Secretary is wrong and that a weak dollar policy leads to no good.
You know, the dollar is, of all currencies, the floating currency, and one where value is determined by markets and geared by the fundamentals of the US economy. We have said in our World Economic Outlook presentation on Monday that the US tax reform is likely to lead to US dollar strengthening in the medium term. So that's our assessment from a macroeconomic point of view.
Right.
I really hope that Secretary Mnuchin has a chance to clarify exactly what he said. But we, as IMF, we don't comment on currencies variations, particularly in the short term.
You don't comment on it, but Olivier Blanchard, a few years ago, your chief economist at the time, esteemed as he is, said talks of a currency war are overblown. Is your chief economic advisor, Maurice Obstfeld, going to have to tell you the currency war began on a Wednesday in Davos?
I very much hope that it is not the case. I think there is so much to watch in terms of monetary policies, fluctuation of currencies, flow of capitals between countries as the economy strengthens, that it's not time to have any kind of currency war. And as I said, we support floating currencies and market-determined rates.
Are there any strengths in Bitcoin or only weaknesses?
You know, I'm from Normandy, and generally we don't like to say yes or no, a bit like economists, one hand, the other hand. And I would like to make a Normand response. There's some goods, there's some bads. So yes and no. What is fascinating about this, let's call it the Bitcoin movements, because there are other cryptocurrencies as well, is the technology that is underneath. This distributed ledger technology that guarantees identification, traceability, authentication of transactions, without interference, without intermediation. I think that was the dream of the original Bitcoin inventors. That's fascinating, and that could be used in multiple circumstances, tracing transactions, land registry, you just name it. And some central banks are looking at it to use for their own virtual currency. So that's the interesting aspect of it. The not so interesting aspect of it is that the anonymity of it is likely to facilitate money laundering, dark money moving around, and things that no one is happy about if we're looking for financial stability and transparency of financial transactions. So that's the dark side. I would add that the Bitcoin's mining, which is this accelerated and augmented use of computers to actually determine the value and incentivize the functioning of the mechanism, is energy
intensive.
Angry.
Yeah.
And, you know, we figure that in 2018, if it continues, that system will actually consume as much electricity as Argentina. That's big, and it's, you know, in times of climate change and, you know, when we look at how much coal is being used in some Chinese provinces to actually mine Bitcoins, it's a big concern.
But if a regulated cryptocurrency becomes the future, do you see it as being accepted as part of, you know, the currency landscape we currently have?
I think it, you know, remember the dot-com boom. We saw lots of IPOs. I remember those youngsters coming and saying, you know, I want to open shops in 10 countries and I want to be quoted on the New York stock market. Many of those just went away and were buried. But of those, we have Amazon, we have PayPal, we have a few big names. So there will be innovations, there will be changes, there will be newcomers, and the landscape will change. What needs to change is our regulatory approach to it. We cannot continue looking at things, you know, the banks, the money market dealers, and da-da-da-da-da. It has to be thought through differently.
If we can get to this historic Friday in Davos, with the President of the United States attending, Mr. Macron is the anti-Trump. He is out showing the flag. He's out doing what many would consider to be soft power. What message will you listen for from the President, given his sense of international relations and maybe the international relations that we will see 5 years from now? I think of Fareed Zakaria, the post-American world. How do we get to a post-Trump world of international relations?
First of all, I'm not sure that President Macron and President Trump do not have some concerns in common. They don't express it the same way. But when I hear President Macron say France is back, advocate the reforms that he has implemented in France and that he plans to roll out in the next few months, he's the best marketing person for the country. So he's not saying France is great again, but he's saying France is back. I don't know any leader who is not doing that for his own or her own country.
Then what is the
they
distinction?
Have a different
what
way
is the
about
distinction, Madame Lagarde, of President Trump? What is President Trump doing that has created such uproar and outrage in the international community?
I think when you listen to President Macron's speech yesterday, he was certainly focused on this France is back and look at what we've done. But he was also seeing it as part of a regional society which is called Europe, and how and he had recommendations as to how it could be. More importantly, and relevant to the US position, he also sees any economic development as part of a global scene requiring a new global contract. And I hope that that dimension of the global landscape, the global state of play, the fact that you cannot be great alone. You have to be great with others. And I hope that that aspect of a rule-based system which is respectful of each and every national identity, sovereignty, while opening trade barriers, while making sure that people are not excluded, while making sure that people are prepared for that, trained for the new technologies. I think that's the whole big challenge that we have going forward. And everybody should be rallying around that.
How can Europe address Germany's current account surplus, but also, public spending?
This is something that we have been repeatedly advocating for Germany. We believe that a current account surplus of 8% is excessive. Some of it is warranted by the fundamentals of Germany, by the aging of society. Fine, but not as much as that. And what we're suggesting is not necessarily to lose competitiveness, but to actually invest. It's tantamount to, too much saving, not enough investment. So we're saying there are investment to be made in the future, in education, in broadband, in grids. But I think, to be fair, Germany is trying to invest and is earmarking funds. The difficulty that they have is that they have too much red tape, bureaucracy, regulatory hurdles to actually accelerate this investment movement. So that is also something to be looked at.
Talk to me about the UK, Madame Lagarde. So this is the only country, as you said, that you haven't raised forecasts for. Do you worry that Brexit will turn ugly?
Well, I hope that Europeans will be civilized enough not to turn that into something ugly. And I hope that they can focus on both the economy, the transition period, and the predictability of what will happen. We look at it from an economic and financial point of view. So take politics and emotion aside. It's really important that people know where they stand promptly. Time is running fast. Yeah. And yes, they have completed stage 1, but there is a big stage 2 with lots of agreements that need to be looked at, custom unions to be identified in terms of what is going to change. The details, shipping goods from the UK to France. How will it cross the Channel? What will be the formalities?
Well, these are the logistics you knew when you were Ministry of Finance for France. I love your phrase, the new global contract. How do we get each nation's individual stories into that new global contract? Do we have to reinvigorate with a new Atlantic Charter? Do we have to do a new multilateral dialogue? Or, as Mr. Trump would suggest, or Mr. Ross, I should say, is it every nation for itself?
It cannot be just every nation for itself. I think there are common denominators and a common platform that is dear and necessary for all countries. Think about security. Think about the fight against terrorism. Think about the fight against pandemics. Think about the impact on the environment of human activity and how we can damage it for long. I'm a diver. I love corals. I'm just horrified by what's happening with corals. I know it's a detail, but it matters. There are some fundamental principles that we should rally around. Human rights, as mentioned yesterday by President Macron as well, is one of them. There is a universal basis around which I would hope that nations, people, and their leaders can rally around. And then from that, each and every nation is going to have to find its own benefits and interests, because people are guided eventually by what is going to drive them and bring them rewards.
But where does this leave China? So if there's a retrenchment from the West in 10 years, do we wake up and realize that actually China is the one that filled the space?
I think we need to make a big effort to understand China. China has been a leader in the global community for centuries. And they clearly, they've massively grew, improved their situation, eliminated poverty, eradicated hunger in the main. They're becoming now concerned about the environment at last. But I'm not sure how they perceive actual leadership and whether they want to be ahead. They certainly have ambitions to be one of the leaders, but the leader, don't know.
You had an acclaimed speech years ago at the London School of Economics where you talked about nations needing to dance together. How do we get China and America to dance again in a more productive way?
I hope very soon they realize, all of us realize that, trade war, retaliation is just not helpful for economies. Mm-hmm. And we need to move to that global order. That would work for all.